Hi everyone, my name is Ali Davis, founder of MediatorAcademy.com, home of the ambitious, home of the passionate mediator. This is the place where mediators, aspiring, new and accomplished, come and learn from experienced mediators, practitioners and thought leaders from around the world. Neuro Linguistic Programming is an approach to communication and personal development, which was started in California back in the 70s by, I think, a couple of academics. And in this interview, I want to discover more of the concepts of NLP and how they can help me become an effective mediator and a more successful mediator. And what I mean by that is, how do I run a more successful mediation practice? Now, my guest today has always thought NLP has a lot to contribute to conflict resolution, and he spent a number of years teaching aspects of NLP in his negotiation and mediation classes. He is an associate professor at the Faculty of Law, the National University of Singapore, and runs the faculty's negotiation and mediation workshops. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School and a consultant with CMP Partners in the US, and a principal mediator and a trainer at the Singapore Mediation Centre. He's published extensively on the subject of mediation, lectures all around the world, and he's a regular contributor to the Kluwer Mediation Blog. It's a real pleasure to welcome Joel Lee onto Media Academy. Joel, welcome.
Thanks very much, Alex. Pleasure is mine. Pleasure is mine. And as you were describing all those credentials, I was thinking, who's he talking about?
Joel, I've got loads of questions, but I think the one that's going to be on my audience's mind is, what is NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming?
Okay, that's a much harder question to ask it. I think one definition that's been thrown around from time to time is the study of subjective experience, which sounds kind of cool, and I could give you a whole academic definition of NLP, and it's great if you don't need to write a paper. But bottom line is, it's the study of how. Bottom line works like this: if you understand how people process information, you can package your communication in a way that facilitates that communication much better. So basically, if you understand that they process in terms of pictures or sounds or feelings, it makes sense to connect with them or to show them things or to tell them things in their language, in a sense, in their sub-language. And that sort of encapsulates for me what NLP is, as it can relate to conflict resolution.
It sounds like a way of lubricating the channels of communication so that they flow a lot smoother and easier.
That's certainly one way to think about it. I think, at least for mediators and negotiators like ourselves, communication is our bread and butter. I mean, the communication skills, communication tools, interpersonal skills, these are the methods by which we interact with and influence the world, right? It's not limited to us, obviously. I mean, the teachers use that, therapists use that as well. And so it makes sense, from my perspective, to us to get a very good handle on communication, because that's how we get things done. It would be great if we were telepathic, but we're not.
Yeah. So, well, give me an example then of one of the concepts from NLP and how it would help improve the quality of the communication, or the way I communicate with somebody else.
Sure. If it's all right with you, let me just sort of say a little bit about the background of NLP. You mentioned earlier that it was created in the 70s by two gentlemen. One was called John Grinder. He was a professor of linguistics at the time. And also at that point in time, his graduate student, Richard Bandler, who was somewhat of a mixed bag. He was a scientist, he was a musician, he was a rock and roll he was kind of many things. And they're both still actively teaching today. And they ask themselves this one simple question, right? What's the difference that makes a difference between someone who's excellent in what they do and someone who just sucks? And that's a technical term when you say someone who just sucks, right? And so from their perspective, they set out to study three of the most exquisite communicators of their time, and they were at that point in time therapists. So you as you might know, Virginia Satir was sort of the mother of systemic family therapy. Fritz Perls, the father of Gestalt therapy. Everyone's a mother and father. And Milton Erickson, who was the father of modern medical hypnotherapy. And even though they used very different schools of thought in terms of therapy, they found that these folks had many patterns of human behavior in common. And they found that when they distilled these patterns of human behavior and they tried it on themselves, it enhanced their ability to communicate with other people. And they thought that's kind of cool, right? And so NLP itself is currently being taught as all these sort of patterns of behavior. But fundamentally, the initial premise of NLP is that if we have a model of excellence, someone who does something very well, could be a sports person, could be a salesperson, could be a doctor, could be anything. There is a way, NLP provides a way through a process called modeling to break down what they do into chunks that we could distill and test out, right? And specific to conflict resolution, which is what you asked a little bit earlier, the idea then is that there are certain human behaviors that we can replicate that will allow us to connect with the parties better, and to connect and to influence them better, and to persuade them better, and maybe even to coach them better so that they can communicate with one another better. So by way of one very quick example, there is an idea in NLP that human beings really process information in one of 6 ways. So you either process information in terms of pictures, sounds, feelings, smells, tastes, and words, right? And so there's 6 different ways. We can try a simple experiment. If any of our listeners right now just want to think, I'm going to say something, you guys think of it, or you just think whatever you think, right? Think of a dog, right? And I'm willing to guess that you have either a picture of a dog, the sound of a dog barking, or the feeling of a dog if you own a dog. If you own a dog, you might have the smell of a dog, which I think is common to many dog owners. I'm pretty sure none of us have the taste of a dog, but let's really, let's not go there. And some of you may see the words DOG. If you break how you represent information down, it actually is just in those 6 forms, and there may be combinations, but it will be a combination of one of those 6 forms, And so if we understand that people have a primary representational system, there's a system by which they habitually communicate in, it's like a sub-language for them, then it makes sense that if I wanted to communicate better with a single person, if I understood how they were processing information at that particular time, it makes sense for me to communicate with them in that sub-language, as it were. We call those representational systems.
So it's a bit like tuning into their frequency.
Precisely. So if I might just point out what you just said, which is to tune into the frequency, comes from what we call the auditory representational system. So I might respond to you by saying, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right? And then I might talk to you in terms of auditory representational system. So I might say, listen, Ella, one of the things that we need to talk about is how we might discuss a solution to our problem. And because you're processing auditorily at that point in time, the words will just fit right into the way you're currently thinking.
Yeah.
Now, this is not to say that we're stuck. So in other words, please don't sort of go away thinking this person's just visual and they're visual forever and ever and ever. Yeah. We cycle through. And there are some subjects which might be more suitable for visual representations or auditory representations. But at some point, we cycle through and we can identify what that cycle, where any person is in that cycle at one point in time. We can connect with them better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about a couple of things. At a behavioral level, being able to sort of change one's behavior in the moment to, as it were, tune into their frequency to improve the quality of the communication between us.
Yeah.
And you also talked about some premise or presuppositions, which is that another way of saying some assumptions or beliefs around?
Well, with any sort of field, we need to have sort of special terms that apply to us and distinguish us from everyone else. So yes, we use presuppositions of communications or presuppositions of NLP. They're essentially assumptions, they're operating assumptions that we operate out of. You want to think of them as fundamental beliefs that a practitioner holds when they're dealing with the world. That works too.
Yeah.
So I don't have strong views about what terms we use.
What are some of the presuppositions, some of the fundamental beliefs underpinning the mediation, the NLP approach?
Okay. Well, let's talk about 4 specific ones that impact directly on communication and therefore conflict resolution.
Yeah.
One of the things I particularly like is this concept called the map is not the territory. And the idea generally is that when we speak with someone and they say something like, they come and shake your hand and they say, hey, listen, thanks for taking the time to meet with me. I believe in a win-win sort of relationship, and I hope you are too. And as we talk like that, this is what I call motherhood statements. You can't help but not, because they all make sense, right? It sounds so good, and you can't help but be drawn into to that rhetoric. The problem is that when someone says to me win-win, I have no clue what they mean. I don't.
Yeah.
And if I was an unaware communicator, my brain would fill in the meaning. And I would assume I knew exactly what you meant, and this is why miscommunication happens, misunderstandings and miscommunication happen, because I think I know what you mean, but actually I don't, and you obviously have a different view in your mind as to what it means. And then when we talk about it as if the same thing, because we're using the same words, then something happens, and we go, oops, something just didn't, there was a disjoint, right? So we start off with the premises that I have no clue what you actually mean. Okay, the map that we're using, the words that we use, don't adequately represent our understanding of reality.
Okay.
So if the words that I use don't represent my understanding of reality, and of course my understanding of reality doesn't necessarily adequately represent reality, my words are a shadow of reality. Right, which is enough to sort of mess people around. That's why you got to watch Matrix before we have a conversation like this, and take the blue. Is it the blue pill? One of those pills. One works.
You can see how this originated from California in the 70s, can't you?
I'll tell you. That's yes. It's well, we can say this over the internet. It's all good. So the map is not arbitrary. So the moment you understand that, then we constantly question our assumptions. Yeah. What might this person mean when they say this? Right now. We don't obviously go around questioning everything they say, because that gets annoying, and then they'll sort of punch you in the mouth. Yeah. But the idea is that let's not be so certain about what we understand someone else might be saying. So if that is true, the map is not the territory, then we need to understand that sometimes when we feed forward a piece of communication, like I say something to you, and so don't take this the wrong way, but let's assume I'm saying this to a woman. All right, and I say so and so, I love you. It's a funny name, huh? So and so. And anyway, she's Chinese, and we have funny names like that. So and so, I love you, and she responds by slapping me and calling me, sort of, you bastard. Right? I have a number of choices, a number of possible responses. One response is I'm going, wow, she's a crazy sort of person, and so she's broken, spoiled, crazy. And because it can't be me that's wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's always the other person that's broken, right? I could do that, but that's hardly helpful, because then I put the locus of control. I can't change. There's nothing I can do, really, because she's crazy, broken, whatever. Or I could actually, the second response I could do is, I tried, I'm a failure, I'll never love again, right? Which also isn't a very useful response. And this is why sometimes another presupposition of NLP is there is no failure, only feedback. And what that means is that if we understand that everything we do is a feed forward in communication, and if it doesn't get the response that you want, it hasn't failed. It's just simply a form of feedback that something wasn't quite working. Right. So if I break this down, or if I connect this to something that mediators do all the time, which is to elicit interest from parties, right? If you sort of operate out the interest-based model, if you say to someone, so what I'm hearing from you is that this is important, whatever this might be, right? And they look at you and they go, no, it's not. Now, as a mediator, I could go, oh shit, I'm a failure. But from my perspective, I'm going, oh, it's not. I'm sorry, I must have, some misunderstood. Help me understand what's important about it. So you don't say it's failure. You just go, yeah, okay, let me deal with it.
And I think, and in that instance, I would imagine one of two possibilities. One is, I'm rubbish at this eliciting interests business, or I could go, it is.
So am I. I'm just better at pretending.
Yeah. Or I could go, no, it is what you really want. You just don't know it yet. And my job is to really force this, rather than be really curious and think, okay, so I wonder what is then if that isn't.
Yeah. And so bottom line for us NLPers is we say that the meaning of the communication is the response you get. It's not what you intended. It's, so if I intended to pay someone a compliment and they get offended, I shouldn't say they're stupid. I should say, obviously I've delivered that a little bit wrong, or I've delivered that in a way that they didn't quite get the message. Yeah. So it's that's the meaning of communication. So I need to then develop flexibility in the way I communicate, finding different sorts of ways to communicate or connect to someone, because honestly, the only person I can change is me. Yeah. I can't change anyone else. If I change me, I might be able to influence someone else, but all I can change is me as a communicator.
Okay, so you got map is the territory. Map is not the territory.
Map is not the territory.
No failure, just feedback, or failure.
There's no failure, only feedback. Yeah, develop flexibility in your communication, and the meaning of your communication is the response you get.
Right. Okay.
All these pithy sayings that we're just sort of rolls off our tongue because we've said it too many times.
So if these are things that as a mediator we take for granted to be true going into a mediation, this is our sort of part of our operating system.
Absolutely.
Then it's likely to help us improve the quality of the communication. We can then utilize some of the behaviors that are consistent with those beliefs or presuppositions.
Absolutely. So the nice thing about operating assumptions is that they influence the paradigms, they influence the way you think, which will then make it very conducive to use the appropriate behaviors. And some of the behaviors that we've talked about, for example, is communicating in the right sub-language, communicating in the proper representational system. So that as one example.
Have you done? I mean, I'm going off subject here, but it's an interesting thought. Have you come across any research around the presuppositions of mediators? Not the espoused presuppositions, but the theories in use.
Not that I have. I mean, I've spent pretty much close my entire working life trying to track down studies that have studied excellent mediators. I mean, and there have been bits and pieces along the way. I understand that in the early NLP days, there was some work done, some modeling done of mediators, but I can't find any publications on it. I can't find a purported existed sort of cassette tape recording of the it's a little bit like the X-Files now, you hear about these things, urban legend, but you can't find it. If you ever get hold of one, please tell me. So I'm not aware of anything that specifically look at the operating assumptions. Obviously, in mediation courses, they talk about models, and so those things are implicitly talked about. But no one explicitly says, you know what, if you're a mediator, these need to be your operating assumptions because they are helpful to your job. I think they tend to dive into sort of the conflict resolution model and the opening statements and the process.
And I think that's a huge flaw in mediation training. I think you've got to start with your operating system. Because if you're running, it's a bit like running the latest version of Windows, the latest version of Microsoft Office on Windows 91.
Yes.
If your operating system is out of date, in other words, the assumptions that you hold are, inconsistent with the core principles of self-determination and free and informed consent and so on, then how can you bring these, how can your behavior, how you intervene, how you manage the process, how can that be consistent if you don't have a fundamental basis of assumptions?
I agree. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a flaw. I think different mediation trainings, they themselves have different sort of assumptions about what a training should be, right?
Yeah.
So they're always consistent within their own sort of belief system. But you can always, I mean, I think when I teach negotiation, for example, and I teach collaborative negotiation, which is interest-based negotiation, one of the things I would say to people is, I don't want to teach you the moves, the negotiation behaviors of collaborative negotiation, because so what if you know those behaviors? If your mindset is not collaborative,
Yeah.
then either one or two things will happen. Number one is that your behavior and your mindset will be incongruent. So there'll be seepage, there'll be leakage, right?
Yeah.
And then you'll be incongruent, and no one will believe you anyway. Or secondly, what will happen is that the mindset will tend to override. So your execution of the collaborative behaviors will not come to pass,
Yeah.
right? If you can change the mindset, if you can start thinking about the world collaboratively, your strategies and your behaviors will flow automatically,
Yeah.
because that's what needs to change. So I quite agree with you.
Yeah.
But as I said, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a flaw, simply because sometimes you have 2 days to train a mediator at different levels, and sometimes you just want to concentrate on the behaviors because you think that's where it's at.
Yeah.
From my perspective, mediation is a high level skill, and you can teach it at a sort of a behavioral level.
Yeah.
But I think it's very, very important to teach it at more than that. And if you address sort of the concepts and the mindsets and all that, you may actually find the behaviors easier to teach.
Yeah.
If you actually spend some time talking about this. So I agree with you.
Okay, well, let me change the frame then from flaw to missed opportunity.
I like that. Well, we're good at that. You know the joke about mediators, right? How many mediators does it change a window?
No.
We don't change windows, we reframe them. I know it's a bad. Sorry.
Okay, so we've got some of the core assumptions that we think will enhance one's ability to communicate. So let's drill down into some of the specific tools, some of the specific sort of concepts and strategies, and where in the mediation process might we deploy these to improve the process.
Well, I think the when we talked about representational systems earlier, you're constantly doing that. Because you're constantly communicating, right? And one of the challenges that you may find is that because Party A is speaking, say, from a visual representational system, and Party B is speaking from a kinesthetic representational system. Part of the reason why they're having communication difficulties is because of that. I mean, they're both speaking English or the same language, but the manner by which they're speaking isn't just somehow is sort of going like that. So sometimes what the mediator does is simply translate it, right? There are lovely examples of this generally in couples counseling, where say the female partner is speaking visually and sees the house in a mess and all that kind of stuff, and the male partner is actually communicating kinesthetically, and it's like the twain shall meet. So so he feels she's not getting it, and she feels that he's not seeing her point of view, and you know what? They're both right. And so one of the things that the therapist does or the counselor does, and which we mediators can do, is to help translate. So essentially saying to one party, well, what this party actually means is and to speak to that party in the representational system they understand. So that's one thing that you're constantly doing.
Yeah.
I think at that point in time you'll probably be operating a lot more at a joint session, in the early stages of communication, exploration of issues, potentially even when you're closing the deal and when there's tension coming back into the negotiation or the mediation. But if you can actually tune them into a space where their language is about the same, they can actually now talk at the same sub language. Maybe you can just sit back and relax and watch them go, right? Sometimes they're just out of rapport with one another.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what you need to do. So that's one thing that you could do. One of NLP's contributions is what we call rapport building skills. In mediation training, we often say, the mediator must build a good relationship with the parties, or they must help the parties build a relationship. They rarely tell you how. They rarely ever say, how specifically do we build a relationship? They assume that we know how to do it, right? And we talk about active listening skills and all that. NLP generally works off a very fundamental model. We call it pacing and leading. And it's a fundamental model because you can apply that to many things. Yeah. So, for example, if you were a party and you were communicating visually, which means that you will use a lot of visual predicates like I see what you're saying, from my perspective. And generally, people operating on a visual representational system speak a little bit faster. They breathe a little bit higher in the chest. Yeah. And I needed to bring you down a little bit to say an auditory representational system.
Right.
I would pace and lead you. What that means is I would actually speak to your representational system first, connect with you at that level, and then slowly shift you to a different representational system. Sometimes you will follow, sometimes you will not. It might, it might not always work on the first go.
Yeah.
But that's an example of pacing leading.
Yeah. Okay.
Another example of pacing leading might be me building rapport with you through the rate at which you speak. So you know how people speak at different rates. Some people speak very, very fast. Singaporeans, like myself, are guilty of speaking very, very fast. Yeah. I'm sure you've encountered people who speak a little bit slower, and it's almost as if, and you want to hurry them up because you're going, come on, I get you, I hear you already. But you see, those people are likely to be processing what we call kinesthetically.
Yeah.
They are feeling every word, and because they're feeling every word, the pace is a little bit slow. Yeah. So again, pace and lead. If you need to speed them up a little, you need to actually match them where they are before bringing them upwards. Yeah. A last example is sometimes NLP. NLP always talks about using body language to build rapport.
Yes.
And first, let me provide a caveat here. It's sort of a red flag. It's not always useful to use this in joint session, and I'll explain why in a little while. But the premise behind using body language to build rapport is that when parties are in rapport, their body language matches. So, for example, they may gesture the same way, they may nod at the same pace, they may cross their legs in the same way, they may lean forward or lean to the side in similar ways. So one way, so we find it's systemic, it works the other way around. So, for example, if you have matching body language, you can take that as a sign of rapport. But it works the other way. If you want to build rapport, you could actually match their body language.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird because I've tried it before. I actually tried it before in a pub with someone I didn't know. We were drinking sort of Guinnesses. And every time he took a drink, I took a drink. And every time we took a drink, I took a drink. And I didn't know him. We were actually some distance apart. And I wanted to see whether I could lead him to a different place. So every time he took a drink, I took a drink. And then I changed my body language. And I lifted my cup with my other hand. And freaky as it was, he lifted his cup with his other hand and he changed his body language. And I was like, yes, got one. Now, it sounds magical, but it's not. It's a process called entrainment, it's a very commonly observed human behavior. It's just that people don't think to do it the other way around.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why I say that's not so useful in joint session is you don't want your body language to be overtly matching only one party and not the other.
I see.
Right, because then you might be perceived as being biased or not neutral or partial.
Yeah.
So what I would say is you could match their tones because that's not so obvious visually. You could match them by what we call crossover matching or crossover mirroring. That's when you're actually matching a part of their body but with a different part of your body. So what I mean is if you're nodding, I could be, for example, tapping my chair at the same rate at which you're nodding. It sounds very esoteric right now, so yes. I won't freak people out. But that's kind of examples of what you could be doing with the pace and lead principle.
Yes. I mean, I like the pace and lead principle for many reasons, but one of the things that strikes me is, and this may be a thought that the audience are thinking now, is see, that was an embedded command there. Do you like that?
It was, wasn't it? I suddenly I'm thinking about it. Because I'm the audience too.
And that was too completely unconscious.
It's terrible. It's a credit to yourself and your trainer.
At what point must we be really careful that we're not perceived, or this isn't being perceived as manipulating the parties? In other words, doing something to them without their knowledge, in order to.
Okay. Well, let me. I'm legally trained, so therefore, let me say the words. Let me take issue with that. I think it's to mediators. We won't argue with the fact that you cannot not communicate.
Yeah.
So even when you don't communicate, that's a communication, right? Anyone who's received a cold shoulder from a partner at home, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, sir.
Right? And I work off the assumption, I work off a different definition of manipulate. Right? So we often understand that the term manipulation to mean something negative. Right? And in fact, you defined it. You actually said to affect someone without their permission.
Yeah.
But you see, Alec, my point of view is, how can you not?
Yeah.
The process of communication is already affecting someone.
Very good point. Yeah.
Right? So surely manipulation can't be that you're affecting someone without their permission, because if we couldn't do that, then we would be horrible mediators. We'd have no tools, right?
Yeah.
Because by asking people what their interests are, for example, you have essentially manipulated them to think about something that is higher than their position, or beneath their position, depending on which direction you want to go. So I'm not sure manipulation should be defined that way.
Yeah. No. I think my question, you've helped me really clarify what I'm thinking now. I guess what I'm thinking is there a danger that a mediator could use some of the skills and approaches of NLP?
Absolutely. I mean, you could turn to the dark side. Yeah, absolutely. you could go to the dark side, and I've said this before. Let me explain. I think that a lot of the time we cannot not manipulate, right? And I use the word manipulate in the original sense of the word, which is to move or use something skillfully, right? I can manipulate my mobile phone, I can manipulate my mouse. There's nothing unethical about that.
Yeah.
It's using something with skill, right? I think what makes something ethical or not, so whether it's ethical manipulation or not, is really the intention by which we operate, our operating assumptions, right? So if I go, I'm going to sort of make Elliot do something against his will, and I'm not sure it's that so easy to do, then that'd be bad. But if I genuinely was using my NLP skills or my mediation skills to help parties come to a space where they can agree, I have no problem calling it manipulation. Right, and I would say that I would be exercising that skill ethically.
Yeah.
Right. So I get it's the whole guns don't kill, people kill, but I think it's a tool like any other tool, and you can use it well, you can use it sort of badly. One of the things that listeners may be familiar with is that NLP, one of the things that is sort of a very powerful tool is the way we use language. So there is a concept called the meta model. The meta model is a language model which helps people restore what we call deletions, distortions, and generalizations in languages. All right. So when people speak, what they say isn't completely what's in here, and they have all kinds of assumptions and so on and so forth. And the meta model are a series of questions that help the speaker retrieve those assumptions. Okay. You could use that sort of in a way to help them develop more choice, right? Because if you can get them to question their assumptions in a sort of respectful way, then what will essentially happen is they'll go, okay, so maybe my conclusion wasn't right because the assumption I was using, is not exactly sound, right? But I could easily use the meta model to actually make someone question reality, right? I could not help, but I could make someone change their belief system. I could manipulate them unethically, right? It becomes a choice. And so when I teach the meta model to my law students, I tell them this. I don't say, I don't want to teach you this because I'm not sure you use it well, or I'm going to teach it to you and I don't care how you use it. Beware how you use it. I mean, and it's a choice. And please use it well and with respect.
Could you give me a specific example of how you could use the meta model in a productive way? Not
Sure. So, for example, if someone says, I can't work with him anymore, he doesn't care, the relationship's not working out.
Okay.
There are three things there. There are three sentences there, right? Which no doubt I will forget in a couple of minutes. But so if you wanted to respond to the I can't work with him anymore, I might look at the person and I say, okay, I hear that. I hear that you can't work with him anymore. Help me understand what stops you. Right? So you get them to elucidate the difficulty as opposed to just accepting that it's not possible to work with him anymore.
Okay.
Right? That's one possibility. He doesn't. I can't work with him anymore. He doesn't care. All right. And we usually go, well, I'm sorry to hear that he doesn't care. We're accepting the assumption that he doesn't care. You might actually ask, well, actually, how do you know he doesn't care? What do you see, hear, or feel that tells you that he doesn't care? And he might say, well, he's always late. Oh, okay. So him being late leads you to assume that he doesn't care. Right? Then you can start breaking the connections between the subject, because you know what, 50% of the world are late.
Yes.
It's not that they don't care; they're just late.
Yeah.
Lateness just happens. We know some people that'll be late for their own funerals, right? So it's just the way it is, right? And if you come from my family background, for example, where it's important to be on time,
yes,
and being late is disrespecting me, right? Of course, I'll think that you don't care. Right, so that's another thing you could question. The third thing you could question is he doesn't care about the relationship, and I'm saying, oh, okay, so it sounds like the way you guys are relating isn't quite working out for you. How would you like to be relating instead? And so you're asking them questions that breaks down what a relationship, because relationship, when used that way, is what we call a nominalization. It's an abstract noun, and it's frozen in time, which basically means that if I say to you, Ellen, our relationship's not working out, that's it. It's final, right? It's not working out, and it's forever and ever and ever. But if you ask the questions, right, okay, so how would you like to be relating instead? It gives fluidity back to the concept of relationship, and then you can think of different ways that you could change. So one is an empowering way of thinking about relationship, and one's not. Right. So those are three examples that I've just given you there, where you can ethically use the meta model, okay, to sort of move around sort of the way people think, and it is manipulation. So I'm not denying that. Okay, but hopefully it's ethical.
Indeed.
Right. And I mean, you could just Google meta model and there'll be web pages on this, books, that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, as a mediator, I mean, one of the things that we're taught, but without much of a structure, is reality testing.
Yeah.
Which, I imagine there are aspects of the meta model that would plug straight into reality testing.
They are. So, for example, the simplest. So, I mean, we usually say, let's reality test and all that. And let me be clear, we should always reality test, in my opinion, in a private session. Okay, because you do that in a joint session, it's too threatening and people lose face. Not good. But for example, simple ways to reality test are just 4 questions that come out of the meta model. What would happen if you said yes to this agreement? Or what would happen if you said no to this agreement? Right? And you're literally forcing them to think about the consequences. I mean, you can ask it any other way you like, but essentially, if you understand that the creature you're hunting is the consequence, so what would happen if is the question, right?
Yeah.
The funkier way of asking that is actually, what wouldn't happen if?
Okay.
Now, do you see how that messes around with your mind for a moment? So for example, Ellen, if I said to you, what would happen if you gave this person a contract? Okay, and it's easy for people to process, and it can usually tell you, well, these are the pros and these are the cons. In the next question, what wouldn't happen if you gave this person a contract? right? And it forces you to actually think about, sort of the kind of like the reverse image, almost like the negative image of that. And interesting enough, that sometimes that actually smokes out some interests
Okay.
that you may not get with that first question.
Yes.
Right? And it gets, it can get a lot more complicated, because what would happen if, what wouldn't happen if, what would happen if you didn't, what wouldn't happen if you did. So you could actually play around with that, and I strongly recommend not doing that when you're driving. It's kind of bad, because smoke comes out their ears and stuff like that. But and you don't have to use all 4 questions, but essentially it's a great way to get people to think about the consequences and thinking around the problem.
Yeah, I mean, makes me think of framing in NLP.
Absolutely.
The system, is that a systemic frame, or is that something?
Well, it actually comes from something else. But let me just quickly speak to frames for a moment. I think NLP has their own sense of framing, and I think mediators do that pretty well. I mean, we do our sort of single word reframes pretty good. We do our reframing, because that's actually one of the skill sets that mediation trainings actually do focus on.
Yes.
A lot of the time. So that's okay. The 4 questions that I talked about come from my trainer in NLP, which he teaches them as what he refers to them as Cartesian coordinates. And if you actually read the Kluwer Mediation Blog, I've actually written an entry on Cartesian coordinates. It's probably easier to read it than me to actually explain it. But essentially, the idea is that if you think of Cartesian coordinates as sort of a graph with 4 quadrants, you can actually get people to think about a problem by cycling through different quadrants, because there's always an x, y, minus x, minus y, minus x, y, or x minus y.
Yeah.
And so, it's a little bit like what would happen if you did, what would happen if you did, and what wouldn't happen if you did, what wouldn't happen if you didn't. So it's those 4 things. The closest thing in many NLP trainings that talk about Cartesian coordinates would be what we call sleight of mouth, which is 16 different ways of reframing. And I recently tested this out 1 year ago. I decided I was going to sort of play around and teach this to a group of mediators I know. And I made copious notes, and I taught it to them, and they loved it. And I promptly went and lost the notes. So, damn it. So I might have to recreate the damn thing at some point. But sleight of mouth is the closest thing, I think, to Cartesian coordinates. Connie Ray Andreas, who is one of the early students of NLP, you might be familiar with the name, does something called reversing presuppositions, which is also very close to kind of Cartesian coordinates.
Okay.
So you can Google 3 things: Cartesian coordinates, which will probably give you a whole bunch of math or sites, so maybe don't do that. Google sleight of mouth, Google reversing presuppositions, Connie Ray Andreas, and you can probably get some interesting readings on that. And I can always sort of email contact with you and advise on those readings.
Wonderful. Listen, Joel, I know you've been really generous with your time so far. We've got maybe a couple of minutes before you have to dash off. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think I could stretch it a little bit, because as I said to you earlier before we started, once you get me started, it's a bit hard to stop me. But I will have to dissipate it probably about 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, all right. Look, there's lots of, and I think we're not even touching the surface of. We
could go on forever, but
we could go on forever, because what we haven't talked about, and I'd love to talk. Maybe we can do another interview. But
sure.
I think I was actually trying to think of how I might say that. In our next interview, we can talk about.
which interesting you should say that, Alan, because I'm obviously very susceptible to all your embedded commands. Is the use of language. We don't actually talk about the use of language. I mean, we talk about questioning assumptions, but we don't actually talk about the use of presuppositions in language. Maybe that's something we can talk about at a future point.
Yes.
But just very quickly, a lot of the time, every sentence that we say has presuppositions in it, and which means that in order for you to understand what I'm saying, you actually have to sort of unconsciously accept the presuppositions. So let me give you a quick example. I used to have I have a friend in New Zealand who used to like asking this question, which is very annoying. He would say, "Are you still beating your wife?" Now, I know that's very politically incorrect. And you usually threw people for a loop, because if you think about it, if you said yes, you're sort of, you're in trouble. And if you said no, you're still in trouble, because the presupposition is that you at some point will be meeting your wife, right? So it's sort of, it's a wise ass type question. But we, if I said to you that, most people, if I say to parties, most people aren't aware that across the world there is a 70 to 75% settlement rate in mediation. When you say it that way,
I've lost the connection.
That there is a settlement rate of 70 to 75%, on average, right? Because it's just that most people don't realize it.
Yeah.
And you say to them, do you realize that? So you can use presuppositions in ways that actually support your mediation outcome, or what you're trying to get parties to do.
Yeah.
So another example I might say, for example, is I may say, I'm not going to guarantee that we will be able to come to a solution immediately. There may be a number of obstacles which we will have to overcome by working together before we agree on a solution. Now, as you listen to all that, I'm presupposing quite a number of things. I'm presupposing that there will be obstacles. But I'm also presupposing that we'll work together to overcome them. And I'm also presupposing there will be solutions. And also presupposing that we will agree on one.
Yeah.
Now, whether we do or not at the end of the day isn't the point, because if it was that simple, then we just do a take serious on this, and we'd be rich.
Yeah.
But the idea is that each of these presuppositions will sequence representations in the mind of the listener.
Yeah.
That will support as you go along.
Yes.
What your desired outcome of the mediation is. Does that make sense? Am I getting a bit too esoteric?
No. That makes really good sense. And I think that's a really helpful. I talk a lot about, or I explore different ways of conducting the opening session, and the mediator's opening statement, and rather than churning out the same old, I think you should make it a really meaningful, empowering narrative. One that really you are a dealer in hope as a mediator.
Yes. I like the way you say that.
And to be able to say, look, I love that. We won't be able to come to. I'm not promising that you'll be able to come to a solution immediately. Embedded in there is, it won't happen straight away, but it's going to happen. It's likely you'll encounter a number of obstacles. Having said that, I'm confident that you'll have the resources and the willpower and the energy and the tools today to be able to overcome those obstacles, to come up with a range of solutions that then you can decide what you want to do. I just think being a bit more thoughtful about what you say, that gives people hope on the day.
I think as mediators, we are professional communicators, which means that every single thing we say, every single thing we do, including our non-verbals, needs to be purposeful. It's a tall order. I sometimes say to people I work with, when I'm training them, I say, listen, if I stop you at any point and I say to you, what was the purpose of your doing that or saying that, right? You need to be able to tell me, even if it's off, you have to bring it to your consciousness. You must have had a purpose for it. Don't do something by default or not really thinking about it because we're just not thinking about it. Don't be unthinking. I think as professional communicators, it's part of our responsibility to be purposeful in everything we say and do.
Yes.
We can sort of relax from time to time because that's incredibly tiring. But most of the time when we're working, I think that's important.
Yes. So I was about to say earlier, we're just skimming the surface, and we haven't even touched on the applications of NLP in business development. Speaking from my own personal experience, trained as an NLP practitioner many years ago, when I was just starting my business, and I have to say a lot of the concepts and ideas and the structures have really helped me build a successful practice. Just by being outcomes focused, using a lot of these things. So I mean, there's an entire library of
maybe the next one I'll interview you, because you clearly have applied it in your own business.
Hey, well, maybe that's an interesting thought. Why do we maybe do that?
Well, we do role reversals in mediation, right?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So finally, before you have to dash off, I want to talk about a little bit about sort of training and learning a little bit more about NLP. Currently, mediation training is the standard model is a 5-day mediation training.
Yes.
I don't know in Singapore what the typical NLP.
It's 5 days for an accreditation. Yeah.
Is it 5 days for accreditation? In the UK, they run 20-day accreditation programs, and that's the standard model for NLP accreditation.
Right. I'm sorry. What I meant is for mediation in Singapore, it's a 5-day standard model.
And I like what you say about we are professional communicators. And I think, for us to really be professional and really cultivate this skill, I'd like to see mediation training incorporate a lot more of the concepts and ideas of NLP into mediation. Tell me a little bit more about the training that you do and how you've integrated that into the training.
Well, I mean, it'd be great if you had a lot of time to integrate, every single thing from NLP into mediation training. But there are always commercial realities. So two contexts. One context is the university context, where I run negotiation and mediation workshops. And the focus of those workshops are training workshops. They're not academic courses where we only discuss sort of theory. The goal is to actually have students leave with some skill. And I'm happy to report, for example, that some of my students who leave the mediation workshop go on to take the accreditation at the Singapore Mediation Centre and pass on the first go. Simply because they've sort of learned the skills, they've learned the theory, and it works very well for them. In those courses, I generally incorporate a little bit of rapport building, a little bit of the presuppositions of communication, so things that we've talked about. For mediation specifically, I incorporate the meta model, because you get the question. In negotiation specifically, I incorporate presuppositions of language, simply because there's a little bit more of persuasions of aspect. I could easily put the other component in the other course. It's just that there isn't enough time in the sort of academic semester. So that's the context of the university. In the context of trainings run by the Singapore Mediation Centre, of which I'm one of the trainers, it's not a standard part of their training yet. But from time to time, when I run the advanced mediation training, which is a 3-day course, I occasionally will introduce NLP, like rapport, like presuppositions, like the meta model. And as I mentioned earlier, late last year, I introduced a little bit of the sleight of mouth, of which now the secret is completely lost, because God knows where that notebook went. But so that's that context where I interact, but we don't incorporate that sort of as a standard sort of thing. The difficulty, of course, is that there are very few NLP trained people in Singapore who are also in this field.
I see.
So very few people feel that they can teach the NLP components in the SMT trainings, which I understand. But so that's one aspect that I think you can incorporate. I mean, if you ask me to sit down and think about every single thing in NLP that we could use, I think there's a lot. I mean, I think there are confidence building exercises that mediators could use. There are subtle things like anchoring that mediators could use, which gets a little bit more to the dark side. So there's all those things that it's entirely possible to use.
Yes.
But I think commercial realities would basically mean you could not, because then you'd be running an NLP course that has an application for mediation, as opposed to a mediation course where we actually teach a little bit of NLP. The other thing I would say is that NLP has tremendous benefits, I think, to any trainer. because a lot of the time when we train, we tend to train content as well. I'm a certified NLP trainer, which basically means that I've gone through, is it 10 days or 14 days? I don't remember that. It was a long training period of trainers training, where we actually trained how to train. And we ran through exercises as to how to set up the stage, in a sense, positionings that we will stand, body gestures that communicate things a certain way, how to create metaphors, how to sort of do demonstrations, that kind of stuff, which has been tremendously helpful to me as a teacher and a trainer, but which I know that many trainers don't have the benefit of, and many trainers, some of whom are very excellent, are excellent because that's who they are. It's not that they've been trained to do that, it's just, they were born that way. But there are many trainers who have the potential to be very excellent, but they haven't had the chance to sort of attend that 10, 14-day course. So I think that has a lot to contribute as well.
Okay. Joel, listen, this has been a really enjoyable interview.
It's been enjoyable for me as well.
I could take hours. Just, are there any particular recommended readings for anyone watching? First of all, how can they find out more about your work? Because I know you've written extensively on the subject. I know you write on the blog of Kluwer Mediation Blog. Where else can they find out more about this?
Well, the Kluwer Mediation Blog is really where I've written a lot about NLP and mediation. I wrote an article years ago in a journal called The Law Teacher, which is an English publication, on using NLP for conflict resolution, or teaching NLP for conflict resolution. So I'm pretty sure that's not easily available unless you sort of have access to the law library somewhere. There is an article in the ADRJ, which is Australasian Dispute Resolution Journal, where I talk about using the model in mediation. So those are places that you could find publications, but I've been meaning to write actually a book, and it's one of my dreams. I'll never get around to it. I need to set an outcome, damn it, on sort of a Neuro Linguistic toolbox for conflict resolvers.
I think you've got to do that. I don't think there's anything out there. You've got to do that.
Yeah, it'd be fun to do. I just need to find the time, and that's a little bit difficult to do. Yeah. So those are places that you can look at specifically. If you Googled NLP, for example, there'd be all kinds of NLP stuff on the web. One good introductory book to NLP in general is something called Introducing NLP. It's written by two Englishmen, one Joseph O'Connor and I think it's John O'Connor and Joseph Seymour, or I've gotten those names switched around. But it's a good sort of introduction to NLP. It sort of sets things up very logically and sequentially. So it's something useful to pick up. I believe Ian McDermott may have written a book called Principles of NLP.
Yes.
That's a pretty good book too, to start as a sort of a starting text. Just a word of warning: there are lots written out there. I used to read every book on NLP, but I can't now because it's third generation, fourth generation. There's many books out there, so it's a little bit harder now to sort of separate sort of the good books from the not so good ones. And sometimes it feels like you're reading the books that are just repeating whatever everyone's repeating. But I think there's some very good ones out there. There are good NLP trainers out there if you're sort of interested in taking NLP training. And websites, stuff on the internet, you should always sort of read with a pinch of salt. But there's some very good and sort of cohesive websites out there. So plenty of places to get information. It's just trying to figure out which information is more useful.
Brilliant. Well, Joel, I want to say a huge thank you for your time, and I really appreciate it. I look forward to the next interview.
Whether you interview me or me interviewing you, right?
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Joel. All the very best.